The leather-bound ledger felt like a ticking bomb inside Pearl's carpetbag as the stagecoach rattled toward South Pass City, Wyoming, carrying her toward a future she had bought with carefully written lies and a man she had never met. She pressed her hand against the worn fabric, feeling the rectangular shape of the book that contained enough evidence to hang half the criminal element between Kansas and California, and wondered if Gabriel Emerson would turn her over to the gang the moment he discovered what she had brought into his life. The year was 1871, and Pearl had spent the last 3 months fleeing from St. Louis with a record of crimes that would make a judge weep. Her former employer, Marcus Hendricks, had trusted her to keep his books, never imagining that his quiet bookkeeper would understand exactly what the numbers meant. She had documented every robbery, every murder for hire, every payoff to corrupt officials. When Hendricks had discovered her copying the ledger, she had barely escaped with her life. Her best friend Sarah had not been so fortunate. Pearl closed her eyes against the memory of finding Sarah's body in the alley behind the boarding house. The authorities had called it a random attack, but Pearl knew better. Hendricks was sending a message. So she had taken the ledger, sold everything she owned, and answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride in a town so remote she prayed Hendricks would never think to look for her there. The advertisement had been simple. Gabriel Emerson, rancher, age 26, seeking a woman of good character for marriage, must be willing to work hard and build a life in Wyoming territory. Pearl was 23, had no family left to speak of, and possessed enough desperation to make anything seem like a reasonable plan. She had written him a letter full of half-truths about her domestic skills and her desire for a quiet life, never mentioning that she was running from men who would kill her without hesitation. The stagecoach lurched over a particularly deep rut, and Pearl's stomach rolled. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, too nervous to keep anything down. Through the window, she could see the landscape growing wilder. Pine-covered mountains rose in the distance, and the road wound through valleys dotted with sagebrush. South Pass City had sprung up during the gold rush, the driver had told her, though the boom days were fading now. It was the kind of place where people did not ask too many questions about where you came from, she hoped. The other passenger in the coach, a traveling salesman with a waxed mustache, had tried to make conversation for the first hour before giving up on Pearl's monosyllabic responses. Now he dozed fitfully, his head bobbing with each jolt of the wheels. Pearl kept her carpetbag close, one hand always touching it. Inside were her few possessions, a change of clothes, her mother's wedding ring, and the ledger that could get her killed. She had tried to convince herself to destroy it a dozen times. Burn it, bury it, throw it in a river. But every time she thought about Sarah's body crumpled in that alley, she knew she could not. Someone had to answer for these crimes. Someone had to make sure Hendricks and his associates faced justice. She just had to stay alive long enough to figure out how. South Pass City appeared as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. The town was smaller than Pearl had imagined, a collection of wooden buildings clinging to the hillside. The main street was rutted and dusty, lined with establishments that looked like they had been thrown up quickly during the rush for gold and never properly finished. She could see a general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a boarding house, and several other businesses whose signs she could not quite read from this distance. The stagecoach pulled to a stop in front of a building marked as the stage office, and the driver climbed down to open the door. Pearl's heart hammered as she stepped out onto Wyoming soil, her legs unsteady after days of travel. The air was thinner here, crisp and cool despite the summer season. Mountains surrounded the town on all sides, making her feel simultaneously protected and trapped. "Miss Harper." A voice called, and Pearl turned to see a man approaching from where he had been leaning against a hitching post. Her breath caught. Gabriel Emerson was not what she had expected. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the easy confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own skin. He wore working clothes, denim trousers and a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. His hat was pushed back enough that she could see his face clearly, angular features that might have been carved from the surrounding stone, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He was handsome in a rough, unpolished way that made her pulse quicken despite her fear. "Yes," she managed, clutching her carpetbag. "Mr. Emerson, Gabriel," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. He studied her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Welcome to South Pass City. Was the journey difficult? Long," Pearl said honestly. "But I am here now." Something flickered in his expression, an emotion she could not quite read. "That you are. Let me get your trunk." "I do not have a trunk," Pearl admitted. "Just this bag." His eyebrows rose slightly, but he did not comment. Instead, he gestured toward a wagon waiting nearby, pulled by two sturdy horses. "The ranch is about an hour outside town. We should get going before dark. These mountain roads can be treacherous." Pearl followed him to the wagon, very aware of the curious looks from townspeople going about their business. A woman in a green dress watched from the general store porch. Two men outside the saloon stopped their conversation to stare. Pearl kept her head high, though her stomach was in knots. Gabriel helped her up onto the wagon seat with a hand under her elbow, his touch firm but brief. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking softly to the horses. The wagon lurched into motion, and Pearl gripped the edge of the seat. As they rolled through town, she tried to memorize the layout. The sheriff's office was near the end of Main Street, a small building with barred windows. A bank stood across from it, and further down she could see a church steeple rising above the other buildings. "It is not much," Gabriel said, following her gaze, "but the people are decent for the most part. We look after our own." "It seems like a good town," Pearl said carefully. "Better than St. Louis." There was no judgment in the question, just curiosity. "Different," she replied. "I needed different." He nodded slowly. "Your letter said your parents had passed. No other family, none that matters." Pearl forced herself to relax her grip on the carpetbag. She needed to appear normal, not like a woman fleeing for her life. "Your ranch, you raise cattle and horses." "I have about 200 head of cattle, maybe 30 horses at the moment. It is not a huge operation, but it provides a living. I have 2 hired men who help with the work." "Decent fellows. You will meet them at supper." Pearl's stomach clenched at the thought of meeting more strangers, but she nodded. As they left the town behind, following a road that wound up into the hills, Gabriel continued talking. His voice was deep and steady, somehow calming despite her nerves. He told her about the ranch, about the harsh winters and the work required to keep everything running. He pointed out landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a creek that ran through his property, the boundary line with his nearest neighbor 5 miles to the east. "I want to be honest with you," Gabriel said after a while, his eyes on the road ahead. "I know this arrangement is unusual. You do not know me, and I do not know you. But I am hoping we can build something real here. I am not expecting love right away, but I am hoping for respect and partnership." "Does that seem reasonable?" Pearl's throat tightened. He sounded so sincere, so hopeful. She was bringing danger to his door, and he had no idea. "That seems more than reasonable," she said quietly. "I will do my best to be a good wife to you, and I will do my best to be a good husband." He glanced at her then, and she saw something warm in his expression. "I think we might manage just fine, Pearl." The ranch appeared as the sun touched the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was more substantial than Pearl had expected. A sturdy log house with a covered porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Fences marked off pastures where cattle grazed, and she could see horses in a corral near the barn. Smoke rose from the chimney, and light glowed in the windows. "It is beautiful," Pearl said, and meant it. There was something solid about the place, something permanent that spoke of careful work and long-term planning. "Built it myself, with some help from friends," Gabriel said, and she could hear the pride in his voice. "Took 3 years to get it to this point. Still have plans for improvements, but it is home." He pulled the wagon up to the house, and 2 men emerged from the barn. One was older, probably in his 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face. The other looked to be in his early 20s, tall and gangly with a friendly smile. "Pearl, this is Frank Miller and Tommy Walsh," Gabriel said, helping her down from the wagon. "They work the ranch with me. Fellows, this is Pearl Harper. We will be married tomorrow morning." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Harper," Frank said, touching the brim of his hat. "Welcome to the Emerson Ranch." Tommy ducked his head shyly. "Yes, madam, welcome." "Thank you both," Pearl said, managing a smile despite her exhaustion. "I hope I will not be too much disruption." "Disruption might be good for this place," Frank said with a chuckle. "Been too much testosterone around here. Gabriel, you want me to finish with the horses while you get Miss Harper settled? I would appreciate that." Gabriel picked up Pearl's carpetbag and gestured toward the house. "Come on, I will show you around." The interior of the house was as solid as the exterior. The main room was large, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A sturdy table with 6 chairs sat in the center, and there was a well-worn sofa facing the fireplace. The kitchen area occupied one corner, with a cast-iron stove and shelves lined with supplies. Everything was clean, but clearly the domain of men who did not pay much attention to decoration. "There are 2 bedrooms," Gabriel said, pointing to doors on opposite sides of the main room. "I have been sleeping in that one. I figured you would want the other one until after the wedding. It is not much, but there is a bed and a dresser." Pearl felt a wave of relief that she would not be expected to share his bed immediately. "That is very considerate." He set her carpetbag down near the bedroom door. "There is a wash basin in there, and I have water heating on the stove if you want to freshen up before supper. Frank is actually a pretty decent cook. He has been managing our meals, but I imagine you will want to take that over once you are settled." "Of course," Pearl said, though cooking for 4 people after years of living in boarding houses seemed daunting. She would figure it out. She had to. Gabriel studied her face for a moment, and she wondered what he saw there. "You look exhausted. Why don't you rest for a bit? I will call you when supper is ready." "Thank you," Pearl said gratefully. She picked up her bag and escaped into the bedroom, closing the door behind her with a soft click. The room was small but comfortable. A bed with a simple quilt occupied most of the space, along with a dresser and a washstand. A window looked out over the pastures, now dimming as twilight settled over the land. Pearl set her carpetbag on the bed and sank down beside it, her whole body trembling with the release of tension. She had made it. She was in Wyoming, hundreds of miles from St. Louis and Hendricks. Tomorrow she would marry a man she had just met, and perhaps that would provide some protection. But the ledger was still in her possession, still a threat to anyone associated with her. Pearl opened the bag and pulled out the leather-bound book. In the fading light, she could see the gilt edges of the pages, could remember the hours she had spent painstakingly copying every entry from Hendricks's records. Dates, amounts, names of the men involved. Descriptions of crimes that made her sick to recall. She had addresses, contacts, connections that reached into the highest levels of society. If she could get this to the right authorities, she could take down a criminal network that spanned half the country. But who could she trust? Local sheriffs might be in Hendrix's pocket. Federal marshals would need convincing, and she had no proof she had not stolen this information for her own gain. A knock on the door made her jump. She quickly shoved the ledger back into the bag and called out, "Yes." "Supper is ready," Gabriel's voice came through the door. "Whenever you are feeling up to it." "I will be right out," Pearl called. She checked her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, smoothing her hair and pinching her cheeks to bring some color back. Then she straightened her shoulders and went to face her new life. The meal was surprisingly comfortable. Frank had made a hearty stew with biscuits, and Tommy kept up a stream of cheerful conversation about the horses and a particularly stubborn calf that had been causing trouble. Gabriel sat at the head of the table, and Pearl noticed how easily he commanded the space without seeming to try. The men clearly respected him, deferring to his judgment on matters around the ranch. "How long have you all been working together?" Pearl asked, genuinely curious. "Tommy has been here about 6 months," Gabriel said. "Frank has been with me since I started building this place. He worked the gold claims before deciding ranching was more his speed." "The gold played out," Frank said with a shrug. "Ranching is steadier work, and Gabriel here is fair with wages." "Not much more a man can ask for." "Do you have family in the area?" Pearl asked. "Got a brother down in Cheyenne," Frank said. "My wife passed about 10 years back, never had children, so this arrangement suits me fine. And I am saving up to start my own place someday," Tommy added. "Learning everything I can from Gabriel. He is the best horseman in 3 counties." Gabriel looked mildly embarrassed by the praise. "Tommy is prone to exaggeration." After supper, Pearl insisted on helping clean up despite Gabriel's protests. It gave her something to do with her hands, something normal to focus on. Frank and Tommy excused themselves to the bunkhouse, leaving Pearl and Gabriel alone in the house. The silence felt heavy. Gabriel banked the fire while Pearl finished drying the last of the dishes. Finally, he turned to face her, leaning against the mantel. "I want you to know," he said slowly, "that if you have changed your mind about this, I will help you get back to wherever you want to go. I will not hold you to the arrangement if you are having second thoughts." Pearl's hand stilled on the dish towel. She looked at him, this stranger who was offering her an escape, and felt a complicated tangle of emotions. Fear, because she had nowhere else to go. Guilt, because she was deceiving him. And something else, something warm and unexpected, because he was being so genuinely kind. "I have not changed my mind," she said softly, "unless you have." "No," he shook his head firmly. "I asked you here because I want a partner, someone to build a life with. I have been alone long enough to know I do not want to stay that way, but I also do not want you to feel trapped." "I do not feel trapped," Pearl said, and it was partly true. "I feel like I have been given a chance at something new. I am grateful for that." He smiled then, the expression transforming his face. "Good. That is good. The preacher is coming by at 10 tomorrow morning to perform the ceremony. It will just be us and Frank and Tommy as witnesses, if that is all right with you." "That sounds perfect," Pearl said. A small ceremony meant fewer people to witness her shaking hands and the lies implicit in her vows. "You should get some rest," Gabriel said. "Tomorrow will be a big day." Pearl nodded and retreated to her bedroom, closing the door behind her. She changed into her nightgown and climbed under the quilt, but sleep was elusive. Through the wall, she could hear Gabriel moving around in his own room, the creak of floorboards and the rustle of fabric. Tomorrow she would marry him. Tomorrow she would tie her fate to his, bringing all her dangers into his home. She pressed her face into the pillow, fighting tears. Sarah's face kept appearing in her mind, pale and still in that alley. Hendricks had done that. He and his associates had killed an innocent woman just to send a message. How many other people had they hurt? How much suffering was documented in that ledger? Pearl sat up in bed, decision crystallizing in her mind. She could not destroy the evidence. She could not let those men continue hurting people. But she also could not put Gabriel at risk without him knowing what he was facing. He deserved to know the truth before he married her, before he bound himself to her legally. She climbed out of bed and pulled on her robe. Before she could lose her courage, she knocked softly on Gabriel's door. "Come in," he called, surprise evident in his voice. Pearl opened the door to find him sitting on the edge of his bed, pulling off his boots. He had removed his shirt, and she caught a glimpse of muscled shoulders before quickly looking away, her cheeks heating. "I am sorry to disturb you," she said, staring fixedly at the floor. "But there is something I need to tell you before tomorrow, something important." Gabriel's posture shifted, becoming alert. "All right, let me put on a shirt and we can talk in the main room." A few moments later they sat at the table, a single oil lamp burning between them. Pearl had retrieved the ledger from her room, and now it sat on the table like the accusation it was. Gabriel looked at it, then at her face, waiting patiently for her to find the words. "I have not been entirely honest with you," Pearl began, her voice shaking slightly. "In my letters, I made it sound like I was simply looking for a new life, a fresh start. That was true, but not the whole truth. I am running from something, from someone." Gabriel's expression remained neutral, though she saw his hands tense slightly where they rested on the table. "Go on." So Pearl told him everything, about working as a bookkeeper in St. Louis, about discovering that her employer was the head of a criminal organization, about copying the ledger in secret. She told him about Sarah, about the murder, about fleeing with evidence that could hang dozens of men. She spoke quickly, the words tumbling out, watching his face for signs of anger or disgust. When she finished, silence filled the room. Gabriel reached for the ledger and Pearl did not stop him. He opened it, leafing through pages filled with her careful handwriting. She watched his jaw tighten as he read some of the entries. "This is real?" he finally asked. "All of this actually happened?" "Every word," Pearl whispered. "I know I should have told you before I came here. I know I have put you in danger by bringing this into your home. If you want me to leave, I understand. I will find somewhere else to go, try to figure something else out." Gabriel closed the ledger carefully. He was quiet for a long moment, his storm-gray eyes fixed on her face. "How long have you been carrying this weight alone?" The question surprised her. She had expected anger, accusations, demands that she leave. Instead, there was something almost gentle in his voice. 3 months, she said. "Since the night Sarah died. And in all that time you have had no one to help you, no one to turn to. I could not risk anyone else getting hurt. Hendricks has connections everywhere. He has bought judges, sheriffs, politicians. I do not know who can be trusted with this information." Gabriel stood and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. Pearl held her breath, waiting for his verdict. When he turned back, his expression was resolved. "Tomorrow morning, after the preacher comes, we are going to lock this ledger in my safe," he said. "Then we are going to South Pass City to talk to Sheriff Dixon. He is a good man, honest as they come. If anyone can help us figure out how to use this evidence without getting you killed, it is him." Pearl's eyes widened. "Us? You are going to be my wife," Gabriel said simply. "That means your problems become my problems. I am not going to let you face this alone." Tears spilled down Pearl's cheeks before she could stop them. "You do not have to do this. You did not sign up for this kind of trouble." "I signed up to be your husband," Gabriel said, moving back to the table. He crouched beside her chair so they were eye level. I know we barely know each other, but I am not the kind of man who walks away when things get difficult. If you are willing to go through with this marriage, I am willing to help you see this through to the end. Whatever that takes." "Why?" Pearl asked, searching his face. "Why would you risk everything for a stranger?" "Because you are not running from creditors or a bad reputation," Gabriel said quietly. "You are running because you tried to do the right thing and it cost you everything. Because you watched your friend die and you still kept that ledger instead of burning it to save yourself. That takes courage. That takes integrity. Those are the qualities I want in a wife, in a partner." Pearl reached out tentatively and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. "I am scared," she admitted. "Hendricks will not stop looking for me. If he finds out I am here, then we will deal with it," Gabriel said firmly. "Together. But Pearl, you cannot keep running forever. Eventually, you have to make a stand. Maybe this is the place to do it. Maybe here, with people who will stand beside you, you can finally get justice for your friend." The idea was terrifying and thrilling at once. Pearl had spent 3 months looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, barely sleeping. The thought of facing Hendricks, of actually using the evidence she had risked everything to obtain, made her feel dizzy. "What if it does not work?" she whispered. "What if he finds a way to make it all disappear?" "Then we will figure out the next step," Gabriel said. "But we will not know unless we try. And you do not have to decide everything tonight. Let us take it one step at a time. Tomorrow we get married. Then we talk to the sheriff. Then we see what our options are." Pearl nodded slowly, feeling some of the weight lift from her shoulders. She was still terrified, but for the first time in months, she was not alone. "Thank you," she said, "for not turning me away, for believing me." "Get some rest," Gabriel said gently, releasing her hand and standing. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day, but we will face it together." Pearl returned to her room and climbed back into bed, the ledger once again hidden in her carpetbag. But this time, sleep came more easily. Gabriel's words echoed in her mind. Together. She would not have to face this alone anymore. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the window. Pearl woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the low voices of men already at work. She washed and dressed carefully in her best dress, a simple blue cotton that Sarah had helped her sew 2 years ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her hair, pinning it up as neatly as she could manage without a proper mirror. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Gabriel already dressed in what appeared to be his best clothes, dark trousers and a clean white shirt. He had shaved and his hair was neatly combed. He looked nervous, which somehow made Pearl feel better about her own butterflies. "Coffee," he offered, gesturing to the pot on the stove. "Please," Pearl said gratefully. He poured her a cup and they stood together in the kitchen, sipping the strong brew in companionable silence. "How are you feeling?" Gabriel asked after a moment. "Nervous," Pearl admitted. "About the wedding. About everything that comes after." "Me too," Gabriel said with a slight smile. "I have never been married before. I want to do right by you." "You already have," Pearl said softly. "After last night, after what I told you, you could have sent me away. Instead, you are still here." "I am not going anywhere," Gabriel promised. "And neither are you, not unless you want to." The preacher arrived promptly at 10, a thin man with kind eyes and a worn Bible under his arm. Frank and Tommy cleaned up and joined them in the main room, standing as witnesses as Preacher Williams opened his Bible and began the ceremony. Pearl spoke her vows in a voice that shook only slightly, promising to love and honor this man she had known for less than 24 hours. Gabriel's voice was steady and sure as he made the same promises. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Gabriel leaned in and kissed her gently, briefly. His lips were warm, and Pearl felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. Frank and Tommy congratulated them, and Frank produced a cake he had somehow managed to bake that morning. They all had a slice, making cheerful toasts with coffee instead of champagne. For a few minutes, Pearl let herself pretend that this was a normal wedding, that she was a normal bride starting a normal life. But reality could not be held at bay for long. After the preacher left and Frank and Tommy returned to their work, Gabriel retrieved the ledger from Pearl's room. "The safe is in the bedroom," he said. "I think we should lock this up before we go to town. I do not want to leave it lying around, and I do not want to carry it with us until we know what the sheriff advises." Pearl followed him to his bedroom, their bedroom now, she supposed, though they had not discussed those particular details yet. Gabriel moved aside a loose floorboard to reveal a small iron safe built into the floor joists. He worked the combination and pulled open the door, revealing stacks of cash, some papers, and a few pieces of jewelry that must have belonged to his mother. He placed the ledger inside carefully, then closed and locked the safe, replacing the floorboard. "There, it will be secure until we need it." "Should we tell Frank and Tommy?" Pearl asked as they prepared to leave for town. Gabriel considered this. "Not yet. The fewer people who know, the better. If Hendricks has people looking for you, we do not want anyone accidentally saying the wrong thing. Frank and Tommy are good men, but they talk when they are in town. Better to keep this close for now." The ride back to South Pass City seemed shorter than it had the previous day. Pearl noticed details she had missed before, the way the mountains created natural walls around the valley, the small homesteads scattered along the road, smoke rising from their chimneys. It was beautiful country, harsh but honest. The sheriff's office was a small building near the center of town, marked by a simple sign. Gabriel tied the horses to the hitching post and helped Pearl down from the wagon. Together, they walked inside. Sheriff Tom Dixon was a man in his 40s with a weathered face and sharp eyes. He looked up from the papers on his desk as they entered, his expression shifting to surprise and then pleasure. "Gabriel, good to see you. I heard you were bringing a bride to town. This must be the lady." "Pearl Emerson," Gabriel said, and Pearl felt a little thrill at hearing her new name spoken aloud. "We were married this morning. Pearl, this is Sheriff Dixon. He has been keeping the peace in South Pass City for about 6 years now." "Congratulations to you both," Dixon said warmly, standing to shake their hands. "What brings you to my office on your wedding day? Hoping it is just a social call, but something tells me otherwise." Gabriel glanced at Pearl, who nodded. "We have a situation, Tom, a serious one." "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" Dixon's expression turned serious. "Of course. Let me lock the door. We would not want to be interrupted." Gabriel moved to the door and shot the bolt home, the metallic click echoing in the small space. Pearl's heart was racing. This was it. They were really doing this. "All right," Dixon said, leaning back against his desk with his arms crossed. "Tell me what is going on." So for the second time in 12 hours, Pearl told her story. She explained about Hendricks, about the criminal network, about the ledger full of evidence. Dixon listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. "This Hendricks," he said when she finished. "Marcus Hendricks from St. Louis," Pearl nodded, surprised. "You know of him?" "Know of him, yes. About a year ago, a federal marshal came through asking questions about associates of his who might be operating in this area. We had a few suspicious characters pass through around that time, but nothing concrete. If what you are saying is true, if you really have documentation of his crimes, that is significant evidence." "It is all true," Pearl said quietly. "Every word." Dixon turned to Gabriel. "You have seen this ledger last night. It is detailed. Names, dates, amounts. Descriptions of crimes that would turn your stomach. Where is it now? "Locked in my safe at the ranch," Gabriel said. "We did not want to bring it to town until we knew what you advised." "Smart," Dixon said, nodding slowly. He moved to sit back behind his desk, thinking. "Here is the situation. I am a county sheriff. My authority only extends to this county. If we are talking about crimes committed in Missouri and God knows where else, that is federal jurisdiction, we need to contact a U.S. Marshal." "Can we trust a marshal?" Pearl asked anxiously. "Hendricks has bought off lawmen before. The marshal who was here last year, Jake Crawford, he struck me as an honest man, incorruptible type. But I hear what you are saying. We need to be careful about who we involve and how we do it." "What do you suggest?" Gabriel asked. Dixon was quiet for a moment, drumming his fingers on the desk. "I suggest we send a wire to the marshal's office in Cheyenne. Do not give details. Just say we have information relevant to their investigation of Hendricks and his associates. Ask for Crawford specifically if he is available. That way we are reaching out to someone we have reason to trust, but we are not putting specifics on a telegraph wire that someone could intercept." "How long would it take to get a response?" Pearl asked. "A few days, maybe a week. In the meantime, you stay out at the ranch. Keep your heads down. Do not talk to strangers. Do not mention what you have or why you are really here." Gabriel nodded. "We can do that. My ranch is fairly isolated. We do not get many visitors." "Good. And Pearl," Dixon looked at her seriously, "if Hendricks is as dangerous as you say, you need to be prepared for the possibility that he might find you before we can get the authorities involved." "Do you know how to shoot?" "No," Pearl admitted. "I have never even held a gun." "Then that is your first lesson when you get home," Dixon said, looking at Gabriel. "Make sure she knows how to defend herself, just in case." The thought made Pearl's stomach clench, but she understood the necessity. If Hendricks sent men after her, she could not rely solely on others for protection. "I will teach her," Gabriel promised. "Anything else we should know, just be vigilant. If you see anyone suspicious, anyone asking questions about Pearl or showing unusual interest in your place, get word to me immediately. I will ride out there myself if needed." Dixon stood and extended his hand. "You did the right thing coming to me. We will see this through." Gabriel shook his hand firmly, and Pearl did the same, drawing strength from the sheriff's confidence. As they prepared to leave, Dixon stopped them at the door. "Gabriel, one more thing. I am glad you found yourself a bride with spine. Not many people would stand up to the kind of evil Pearl is facing. You picked a brave woman." "I know," Gabriel said, and the pride in his voice made Pearl's eyes sting with unshed tears. They left the sheriff's office and climbed back into the wagon. As Gabriel guided the horses out of town, Pearl felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. They had taken the first step. They had involved someone who could help. It was not a solution yet, but it was progress. "You need to pick up any supplies while we are in town?" Gabriel asked as they passed the general store. Pearl considered. "I could use some fabric if we can spare it. I only have 2 dresses and I will need more for work around the ranch." Gabriel pulled the wagon to a stop. "Let us get what you need. No point in waiting." The general store was a treasure trove of goods. Everything from food staples to tools to bolts of fabric in various colors and patterns. The proprietor, a friendly woman named Mrs. Chen, congratulated them on their marriage and helped Pearl select sturdy cotton fabric in practical colors. "You will want something that does not show dirt too badly," Mrs. Chen advised, holding up a bolt of dark green cotton. "And this brown calico is very popular with the ranch wives." Pearl selected enough fabric for 3 dresses, along with thread and needles. Gabriel added some coffee and sugar to their purchases, along with a new cast iron skillet to replace one that had developed a crack. As Mrs. Chen tallied their purchases, A man entered the store. He was well dressed by frontier standards, wearing a suit that looked out of place in the rough mining town. Something about him made Pearl's instincts prickle. She watched from the corner of her eye as he browsed, noticing that he seemed more interested in watching her than in the goods on the shelves. Gabriel must have noticed too, because his posture shifted subtly, becoming more alert. He paid for their purchases quickly and guided Pearl outside with a hand at the small of her back. "You recognize that man?" he asked quietly as they loaded the supplies into the wagon. "No," Pearl said, her heart racing. "But something about him felt wrong. Might be nothing. Might be a traveling businessman. But we should get home." Gabriel helped her up onto the seat and took the reins, urging the horses into a trot. Pearl kept glancing back as they left town, but the man did not emerge from the store. Still, she could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in thought. When they finally pulled into the yard, Pearl felt a rush of relief at the familiar sight of the log house and barn. This was home now, at least for the foreseeable future. She needed to learn to feel safe here. Frank and Tommy were working in the corral with a young horse, and they waved as Gabriel pulled the wagon up to the house. Gabriel helped Pearl down and carried their purchases inside. "Time for that shooting lesson," he said once everything was put away. "Come on, we will go out behind the barn where the sound would not carry too far." Pearl followed him to his bedroom, where he unlocked a cabinet she had not noticed before. Inside were several rifles and a pair of revolvers. Gabriel selected one of the revolvers, a Colt that looked well maintained but not new. "This was my father's," he said. "It is a good gun, reliable. I will teach you on this one, and if you take to it, it is yours." Behind the barn, Gabriel set up a row of old cans on a fallen log. Then he showed Pearl how to hold the revolver, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger rather than pull it. His hands were patient on hers, adjusting her grip, steadying her wrist. "Do not be afraid of it," he said. "Respect it, but do not fear it. The gun is a tool, nothing more. You are the one with the power." Pearl's first shot went wide, the recoil startling her. But Gabriel encouraged her to try again and again until she managed to clip the edge of one of the cans. By the time the sun started to set, she had actually hit 2 cans dead on, and her hands were starting to understand the weight and feel of the weapon. "That is good for a first lesson," Gabriel said approvingly. "We will practice every day until you are comfortable. I want you to keep this gun with you, loaded when you are in the house alone." The idea of being in the house alone had not occurred to Pearl. "Where will you be?" "I have to work the ranch," Gabriel said gently. "Most days I am out from dawn to dusk. Frank and Tommy are usually nearby, but there will be times when no one is in shouting distance. I need to know you can protect yourself if something happens." Pearl nodded, swallowing hard. She was a married woman now, the mistress of this ranch house. She would have responsibilities, and one of them was apparently learning to shoot straight. They walked back to the house as twilight fell, the mountains turning purple against the darkening sky. Inside, Pearl lit the lamps while Gabriel started a fire. There was something domestic about the routine, something that made Pearl's chest ache with an emotion she could not quite name. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "I could try to make something for supper." "There is leftover stew from last night," Gabriel said. "We could heat that up. Tomorrow you can start taking over the cooking if you want, but tonight let us keep it simple." They ate together at the table, the silence between them companionable now. Pearl found herself studying Gabriel's face in the lamplight, noticing details she had missed before. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the surprising gentleness in his storm gray eyes. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her looking. Pearl felt her cheeks heat. I was thinking that this morning I married a stranger, and now that stranger is my husband. It is strange how quickly life can change. Do you regret it? Gabriel asked quietly. No, Pearl said honestly. I am scared, and I feel guilty for bringing my problems into your life, but I do not regret marrying you. You have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect. You had every right to expect kindness, Gabriel said firmly. Every right to expect protection and help. You should not have to face what you are facing alone. They cleaned up supper together, moving around the small kitchen with surprising ease. When the dishes were done, they found themselves standing awkwardly in the main room, neither quite sure what came next. I can sleep on the sofa, Gabriel offered. Until you are comfortable with sharing a room, I do not want you to feel pressured. Pearl considered this. They were married now, legally and in the eyes of God. And despite the strange circumstances, despite knowing him for barely a day, she felt safe with Gabriel in a way she had not felt safe in months. We are married, she said softly. You do not have to sleep on the sofa, unless you would prefer to. I would prefer to sleep in my own bed, Gabriel admitted, but only if you are sure. Pearl, I meant what I said about not expecting love right away. I am not expecting anything tonight except sleep. You understand? Pearl nodded, grateful for his consideration. I understand. I trust you. They took turns changing for bed, Gabriel first and then Pearl in the privacy of the bedroom. When she emerged in her nightgown with her robe wrapped tightly around her, she found Gabriel already in bed, the covers pulled up to his waist. He had left the lamp burning low on the bedside table. Pearl climbed in on the other side, acutely aware of the warmth of his body just inches away. The bed was large enough that they were not touching, but still, it was the most intimate she had been with any man. Good night, Pearl, Gabriel said softly, reaching to turn down the lamp. Good night, she whispered back. Darkness filled the room, broken only by the faint glow of moonlight through the window. Pearl lay very still, listening to Gabriel's breathing gradually slow and deepen. She had expected to lie awake all night, but somehow the steady rhythm of his breathing was soothing. Before she knew it, she was drifting off to sleep, feeling safer than she had in 3 months. The days that followed developed their own rhythm. Gabriel rose before dawn to begin work on the ranch, and Pearl rose with him, learning to make coffee the way he liked it and prepare breakfast for the men. Frank and Tommy took their meals with them now that there was a woman in the house, all of them sitting around the table in the early morning darkness. Pearl threw herself into learning how to run the household. She baked bread, mended clothes, and started a vegetable garden near the house. Mrs. Chen had given her seeds during their visit to town, and Pearl found something therapeutic about working the soil, coaxing life from the earth. Every afternoon, Gabriel gave her shooting lessons. Her aim improved steadily, and she learned to reload quickly, to clear a jam, to handle the revolver with confidence. Gabriel also taught her to ride, putting her on a gentle mare named Daisy and leading her around the corral until she felt steady enough to try on her own. You need to be able to ride if there is an emergency, Gabriel explained. If something happens and you need to get to town fast, I do not want you stuck here. At night, they shared the bed with a careful respect for each other's space. Sometimes they talked in the darkness, Gabriel telling her stories about growing up on a ranch in Montana, Pearl sharing memories of her childhood in Ohio before her parents died. They were learning each other slowly, carefully, building something that felt like it might become friendship, or maybe something more. A week after their visit to the sheriff's office, Gabriel rode to town to check for a telegram. He returned with news, his expression serious as he dismounted and handed the reins to Tommy. "Dixon got a response," he said to Pearl, who had come out to meet him. "Marshal Crawford is coming himself, should be here within the week." Pearl's stomach flipped. This was what they wanted, what they needed, but it made everything feel suddenly real and terrifyingly immediate. That night, they retrieved the ledger from the safe so Pearl could review it before meeting with the marshal. She sat at the table, paging through the careful entries, remembering each one. Gabriel sat across from her, occasionally asking questions about specific entries. "This date here," he said, pointing to an entry from 18 months ago. "What happened?" Pearl read the entry and felt sick. A witness to one of their robberies. Hendricks had him killed to keep him quiet. The man's name was William Thompson. He had a wife and 3 children. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "There are dozens of entries like this." 63 murders, Pearl said quietly. "At least the ones I found documented. There may be more, plus robberies, extortion, fraud, corruption. Hendricks has been operating for over a decade. And no one has stopped him. The people who have tried ended up dead, like Sarah." Pearl closed the ledger, unable to look at it anymore. "I keep wondering if I am doing the right thing, if bringing this to light is worth the risk, or if I am just going to get more people killed." "You are doing the right thing," Gabriel said firmly. He reached across the table and took her hand. "These people deserve justice. The families of the victims deserve to know what happened, and Hendricks needs to be stopped before he hurts anyone else." "But what if he hurts you?" Pearl's voice broke. "What if he comes after you because of me?" "Then I will deal with it," Gabriel said. "Pearl, look at me." She raised her eyes to his face. "I knew what I was getting into when I agreed to help you. I'm not some naive fool who does not understand the danger, but I also know that some things are worth fighting for. Justice is worth fighting for. You are worth fighting for." Tears spilled down Pearl's cheeks. In the week they had been married, Gabriel had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. He had taught her to shoot, to ride, to feel safe again. He had made her laugh with stories about stubborn cattle and clever horses. He had held her when she woke from nightmares about Sarah's death, soothing her back to sleep with whispered reassurances. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She barely knew him, they had been married a week, and yet she could feel her heart opening to him in a way she had never experienced before. "Gabriel," she whispered, not sure what she wanted to say. He stood and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair. "What is it?" "I am scared," she admitted, "of Hendricks, of what might happen when the marshal comes, but I am also scared of something else." "What?" "I am scared of how much I have come to care about you in such a short time. I am scared of losing you." Gabriel's expression softened. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "You are not going to lose me. I am right here and I am not going anywhere." "You cannot promise that," Pearl said, "not with everything that is happening." "Then I will promise this," Gabriel said, taking both her hands in his. "I will do everything in my power to keep you safe and to stay by your side. And Pearl, I care about you too. More than I expected to when I placed that advertisement for a bride. You are brave and strong and kind, and I count myself lucky that you are my wife." Pearl leaned forward and kissed him, a gentle press of lips that carried all the emotion she could not put into words. Gabriel froze for a moment, then kissed her back, his hand coming up to cup the back of her head. It was sweet and tender and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens, we face it together. You and me." "Agreed, agreed," Pearl whispered. That night, they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, no longer maintaining the careful distance they had kept before. Pearl listened to Gabriel's heartbeat beneath her ear, and felt a peace she had not known was possible given the circumstances. Marshal Jake Crawford arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, riding into the ranch yard on a dusty horse with saddlebags that suggested a long journey. He was a man in his late 30s, tall and lean with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a marshal's badge on his vest and carried himself with quiet authority. Gabriel met him in the yard while Pearl watched from the porch, her hand instinctively going to the pocket where she now kept the revolver. Sheriff Dixon had accompanied the marshal, and the two men dismounted together. "Gabriel Emerson?" Crawford asked, extending his hand. "That is right, and you must be Marshal Crawford. Thank you for coming. Sheriff Dixon's telegram suggested you might have information relevant to my investigation of the Hendricks organization. I am very interested in hearing what you have to say." Crawford's gaze shifted to Pearl. "And this must be your wife." Pearl descended the porch steps, trying to project confidence she did not entirely feel. "Pearl Emerson, I am the one with the information." Crawford studied her for a long moment. "Let us go inside and talk." They gathered around the kitchen table, Pearl in the middle with Gabriel on one side and Crawford on the other, Dixon standing by the door. Gabriel had retrieved the ledger from the safe, and now it sat on the table between them. "Before we go further," Crawford said, "I need to understand how you came to possess this information. Start from the beginning." So Pearl told her story for the third time, this time including every detail she could remember. Crawford listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small leather notebook. When she finished, he reached for the ledger. "May I?" Pearl nodded, and Crawford began to page through the book. His expression remained professionally neutral, but she saw his eyes widen at some of the entries. He took his time, reading carefully, occasionally returning to earlier pages to cross-reference something. Finally, he closed the ledger and looked up at Pearl. "This is remarkable. I have been investigating Hendricks for 2 years, and this is more concrete evidence than I have been able to gather in all that time. Names, dates, amounts, descriptions of criminal activity. If this information is accurate, we can build a case that will bring down not just Hendricks but his entire network." "It is all accurate," Pearl said quietly. "I copied every entry exactly as it appeared in his books. I have a very good memory for numbers." "The problem," Crawford continued, "is verification. Defense attorneys will argue that you could have fabricated this, that you are a disgruntled former employee making accusations. We need to corroborate these claims with other evidence." "How do we do that?" Gabriel asked. "We start by investigating some of the claims that can be verified. These murders, for instance. We can check if there are bodies, if the deaths match the dates and descriptions Pearl recorded. We can track down some of these business transactions, see if the amounts match what she documented. If we can verify even a portion of what is in this ledger, it will give credibility to the rest." "How long will that take?" Pearl asked. "Weeks, possibly months. This is a complex investigation spanning multiple states." "But I can promise you this, Miss Emerson." "Mrs." Gabriel corrected gently. "Mrs. Emerson." "Mrs. Emerson," Crawford amended with a slight nod. "I promise you that I will pursue this case with every resource at my disposal. Hendricks has been a thorn in the side of law enforcement for too long. If you have given us the tools to take him down, I will use them." "What about Pearl's safety?" Gabriel asked. "If Hendricks suspects she has this information, he will send men after her." "I will not lie to you, that is a risk," Crawford said seriously. "Which is why I am going to suggest that we take custody of this ledger. I can keep it safe, and if something happens to either of you, the evidence will not be lost." Pearl felt a surge of panic at the idea of letting the ledger out of her sight. It was the only proof she had, the only thing that gave Sarah's death meaning. "I need your word," she said to Crawford. "Your word that you will use this to get justice. That you will not let it disappear into some evidence room and be forgotten." Crawford met her eyes steadily. "You have my word. This is my priority case. I will see it through." Gabriel squeezed Pearl's hand under the table. After a moment, she nodded. "All right, take it, but I want updates. I want to know what is happening." "I can do that," Crawford agreed. He carefully wrapped the ledger in oilcloth from his saddlebag and tucked it away. "In the meantime, I advise you both to be cautious. Hendricks has a long reach. If he learns where you are, he may send people." "We will be ready," Gabriel said firmly. After Crawford and Dixon left, riding back toward town with the ledger safely in the marshal's possession, Pearl felt strangely empty. That book had been her constant companion for 3 months, her burden and her purpose. Now it was gone, and she was left with nothing but the waiting. "You did the right thing," Gabriel said, pulling her into his arms. "Now the authorities can do their job." "I know," Pearl said against his chest, "but it feels strange, like I just handed over a part of myself." "You handed over the evidence. The courage that made you gather it in the first place, that is still yours. No one can take that from you." The next few weeks passed with agonizing slowness. Gabriel kept Pearl busy with work around the ranch, teaching her more about horses and cattle, about the rhythms of ranch life. She learned to read the weather in the clouds, to identify animal tracks, to help with minor injuries to the livestock. Frank and Tommy treated her as part of the team, asking her opinion and trusting her judgment. At night, she and Gabriel grew closer. They talked for hours in the darkness, sharing dreams and fears and memories. They made love for the first time 2 weeks after the marshal's visit, a tender joining that left Pearl feeling cherished and safe. Gabriel was patient and gentle, concerned with her pleasure as much as his own. "I love you," she told him one night, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I know it is fast. I know we barely know each other, but I love you." Gabriel kissed her deeply. "I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you walked off that stagecoach, looking terrified but determined. You have brought so much light into my life, Pearl." Life might have been perfect if not for the waiting, the constant awareness that somewhere out there, Hendricks might be looking for her. Gabriel taught her to be vigilant, to always know where the nearest weapon was, to trust her instincts if something felt wrong. A month after Marshal Crawford's visit, Gabriel rode to town for supplies and returned with news. He found Pearl in the garden, weeding around the tomato plants that were finally starting to produce fruit. "Pearl," he called, and something in his voice made her drop her trowel and run to meet him. "What is it? What happened?" Crawford sent a telegram to Dixon. "They have made arrests. 12 of Hendricks's associates are in custody, including 3 men who were wanted for murder. They corroborated parts of what you documented in the ledger." Pearl's knees went weak and Gabriel caught her elbow to steady her. They believed it. The evidence held up. It held up. More than that, some of the men they arrested are talking, trying to make deals. They are providing additional evidence against Hendricks. Crawford says they are building a case to move against him directly. "When?" Pearl asked breathlessly. "Soon. Maybe within the next few weeks. But Pearl, there is more. One of the men they arrested, he admitted that Hendricks had sent people west to look for you. They know you came this direction." Fear shot through her. "Do they know where I am specifically?" Crawford does not think so. "The man said they were checking all the towns along the stage route, asking about a woman traveling alone. But you were coming here as a mail-order bride, not traveling alone in the traditional sense. And you were using your real name, which they might not expect. Still, we need to be careful." That night, Gabriel insisted on setting up a watch rotation. He would take the first shift, then wake Frank, who would wake Tommy. Someone would be awake and alert at all times, watching the approaches to the ranch. "Is that really necessary?" Pearl asked, though her racing heart suggested she knew the answer. "I would rather be overcautious than sorry," Gabriel said grimly. "If anyone comes onto this property with ill intent, I want to know about it before they reach the house." Pearl slept fitfully, waking at every small sound. Gabriel was gone from their bed, keeping watch from the porch with a rifle across his knees. She got up once to bring him coffee, and he pulled her down beside him for a moment, holding her close. "Try to rest," he murmured against her hair. "Nothing is going to happen tonight." But 2 nights later, something did happen. Pearl woke to the sound of horses approaching fast. Gabriel was already out of bed, pulling on his trousers and grabbing his rifle. From outside, she heard Frank's voice shouting a warning. "Riders coming in hard." Pearl's hands shook as she dressed quickly and grabbed her revolver. Gabriel was at the window, peering out into the darkness. "4 riders," he said tersely. "Could be nothing, could be trouble. Pearl, I want you in the root cellar, now." "I am not hiding while you face them alone," Pearl protested. "You are not hiding, you are being smart. If these are Hendrix's men and they get past us, I need you somewhere safe where you can defend yourself." Gabriel grabbed her shoulders, his eyes intense. "Please, Pearl, do this for me." Pearl nodded reluctantly. The root cellar was accessed through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor, and Gabriel lifted it quickly, helping her down the wooden ladder. The space was small and dark, smelling of earth and potatoes. "Lock it from the inside," Gabriel instructed. "Do not come out until you hear my voice specifically. If you hear anything else, anyone else, you use that revolver. Understood?" "Be careful," Pearl whispered, terror making her voice shake. "I will. I love you." He closed the trapdoor, and Pearl heard the bolt slide home on her side. She threw it, plunging herself into complete darkness. Above her, she could hear boots on the floorboards, the door opening and closing. Male voices, though she could not make out words. Pearl sat on the earthen floor, the revolver gripped in both hands, and prayed harder than she had ever prayed in her life. The waiting was agonizing. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Pearl heard raised voices, then the sharp crack of a gunshot. She bit back a scream, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. More gunshots. Shouting. The sound of horses galloping away. Then silence. Pearl waited, every muscle tense, her finger on the trigger of the revolver. She heard the front door open, footsteps crossing the floor above her head. "Pearl," Gabriel's voice called. "Pearl, it is safe. You can come out." Relief flooded through her so intensely she felt dizzy. She fumbled with the bolt in the darkness, finally getting it free. The trapdoor lifted and lamplight spilled down. Gabriel's face appeared above her, and she had never been so glad to see anyone in her life. He helped her up, and she threw her arms around him, shaking. "Are you hurt?" "I heard gunshots. I am fine. Frank winged one of them, but they rode off. Pearl, they were definitely looking for you. One of them called out, asking if we had a woman named Pearl Harper here." "What did you tell them?" "I told them nobody by that name lived here, and they needed to get off my property. They tried to push past us toward the house, and that is when Frank fired a warning shot. They returned fire but retreated when they realized we were not going to let them through without a fight. Frank and Tommy came inside then, both of them looking grim but unharmed. Tommy had a scratch on his cheek from flying splinters, but otherwise they were intact. "They will be back," Frank said flatly, "probably with more men. We held them off tonight because they were not expecting resistance, but if they come back prepared, the 4 of us might not be enough." "We need to get word to the sheriff," Gabriel said, "and to Crawford. Pearl, I think you need to leave the ranch for a while. Go somewhere safer until this is resolved." "No," Pearl said firmly. "Running is what I have been doing for months. I am not leaving you to face this alone." "Pearl, no," she repeated, her voice stronger now. "You said we face this together. That means I stay." Gabriel looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him. He sighed. "All right, but we fortify this place, board up some of the windows, set up better defensive positions. And I am riding to town at first light to bring back the sheriff and anyone else who is willing to help." "I will go with you," Frank offered. "Two riders are safer than one." The rest of the night passed without incident, though none of them slept. At dawn, Gabriel and Frank saddled up and rode for town at a gallop. Pearl and Tommy remained at the ranch, both of them armed and watching the horizon. "You are a brave woman, Miss Pearl," Tommy said as they kept vigil from the porch. "Most ladies would have fainted dead away with all that shooting." "I am too angry to faint," Pearl said grimly. "These men killed my best friend. They have chased me halfway across the country. I am tired of being afraid." Gabriel returned by mid-morning with Sheriff Dixon, 2 deputies, and surprisingly, Marshal Crawford. The marshal had been in South Pass City when Gabriel arrived with news of the attack. "This changes things," Crawford said as they all gathered in the house. "If Hendricks is bold enough to send men to attack you openly, it means he is getting desperate, which probably means our investigation is making him nervous." "How long before you can arrest him?" Pearl asked. "We are close. Maybe another week or 2. "But that might not be fast enough to keep you safe." Crawford paced the small room, thinking. "I have an idea, but you are not going to like it." "What kind of idea?" Gabriel asked warily. "We use Pearl as bait." The room erupted in protests, Gabriel's voice loudest among them. Crawford held up his hands for silence. "Hear me out. Hendricks knows Pearl is in this area. He is sending men to search for her. What if we let them find her, but on our terms? We set a trap, let them think they can grab her, then spring it when they make their move. We could take them alive, use them to testify against Hendricks." "Absolutely not," Gabriel said flatly. "I am not putting Pearl in danger like that." "I will do it," Pearl said quietly. Everyone turned to stare at her. "Pearl, no," Gabriel said desperately. "It is too dangerous." "It is dangerous either way," Pearl pointed out. "Right now they are hunting for me, and they might attack the ranch again. They might hurt you or Frank or Tommy. If we set a trap, at least we have some control over the situation. At least we can prepare." "She has a point," Dixon said reluctantly. "If we are smart about this, we might be able to end the threat permanently." Gabriel shook his head. "I do not like this. There are too many things that could go wrong." "I know," Pearl said, taking his hands, "but I am tired of running. I am tired of looking over my shoulder. If we do this, if we capture these men, maybe it will finally be over." The debate went on for hours. Gabriel remained opposed, but gradually Crawford outlined a plan that began to sound feasible. They would spread word in town that Gabriel's wife was there alone during the day while he worked the ranch. They would make it look like an easy target, but in reality, the house would be full of armed men ready to defend her. "We will need at least a dozen men we can trust," Crawford said. "Hidden inside the house, watching from the barn, covering all approaches. When Hendricks's men make their move, we surround them. Take them alive if possible." "And if it goes wrong," Gabriel demanded, "if they get to Pearl before we can stop them?" "Then I shoot them myself," Pearl said, patting the revolver at her hip. "Gabriel, you taught me well. I am not helpless." Finally, reluctantly, Gabriel agreed to the plan. Over the next 2 days they prepared. Crawford brought in federal deputies from Cheyenne. Sheriff Dixon recruited men from town who could be trusted. Frank and Tommy worked to create hidden positions around the property where armed men could wait unseen. Pearl tried to carry on as normal, tending the garden, doing laundry, cooking meals for the small army now hiding around her ranch. But her nerves were stretched tight. She jumped at every sound, her hand always hovering near her weapon. The night before they planned to set the trap, Gabriel held her close in their bed, neither of them even pretending they might sleep. "I have a bad feeling about this," he whispered against her hair. "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose you?" "You will not lose me," Pearl promised. "We are going to get through this together, and then we are going to have the life we planned. Children running around this ranch, maybe expand the herd, grow old together watching the mountains." "I want that so much," Gabriel said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want everything with you, Pearl. You have become my whole world in such a short time." "And you are mine," Pearl said fiercely. "Which is why we are going to do this right. We are going to end this threat once and for all, and then we are going to live without fear." The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, which seemed wrong somehow. Pearl had expected dark clouds, an ominous atmosphere. Instead, the sun shone brilliantly, and birds sang in the trees as if this were any ordinary day. Gabriel rode out with Frank and Tommy, making a show of leaving Pearl alone at the ranch. In reality, a dozen armed men were hidden throughout the property. 2 in the barn loft, 3 behind the chicken coop. Crawford himself was in the root cellar, having insisted on being closest to Pearl in case something went wrong. More men were positioned in the trees along the road. Pearl went about her morning chores, very aware of being watched from multiple directions. She hung laundry on the line, fed the chickens, swept the porch. Every action felt stilted, artificial. By noon, nothing had happened. Pearl made sandwiches and coffee, passing them out to the hidden guards. Crawford emerged briefly from the root cellar to stretch his legs. "They may not come today," he warned. "This could take several days." But 2 hours later, a lookout gave the signal. Riders approaching. Pearl's heart began to race. She positioned herself in the kitchen, near the window but not directly in front of it, the revolver hidden in the folds of her skirt. From outside, she heard horses stopping in the yard. "Hello, the house." A male voice called. Pearl moved to the door but did not open it. "What do you want?" "Looking for a woman, madam, Pearl Harper. We heard she might be around these parts." "No one by that name lives here," Pearl called back, following the script they had rehearsed. "This is the Emerson Ranch. Mind if we come in and look around?" "I mind very much. My husband is not home, and I do not entertain strange men." There was a pause, and then she heard the sound of boots on the porch steps. Pearl's hand tightened on the revolver. Through the window, she could see 3 men approaching the house. "Madam, we are coming in," the lead man called. "You can make this easy or hard, but we are coming in." The door burst open, and the 3 men rushed inside. Pearl raised her revolver, but before she could fire, Crawford emerged from the root cellar behind them. "U.S. Marshal, drop your weapons." Everything happened at once. The men spun toward Crawford, reaching for their guns. Pearl fired, her shot going wild but causing enough distraction that Crawford could tackle the nearest man. The other hidden guards burst from their positions, surrounding the house. One of Hendrix's men managed to fire a shot that splintered the doorframe near Pearl's head. She ducked, then fired again, this time hitting the man in the shoulder. He screamed and dropped his gun. Within seconds, it was over. All 3 men were on the ground, disarmed and being restrained by federal deputies. Pearl stood frozen, the revolver still raised, her whole body shaking. Gabriel burst through the door, having ridden back at the sound of gunfire. He pulled Pearl into his arms, checking her frantically for injuries. "I am fine," she managed. "I am fine." "You are bleeding," Gabriel said, touching her face. Pearl reached up and felt wetness. A splinter from the doorframe had cut her cheek, but it was minor. Just a scratch. Crawford had the 3 captured men lined up. Names. Now, and I want to know who sent you. The man Pearl had shot was talking before Crawford even finished speaking. Marcus Hendricks. He sent us to find Pearl Harper and bring her back to St. Louis. Dead or alive, he said, but preferably alive so she could tell him who she shared that ledger with. How many more of you are there? Crawford demanded. Just us in this area. But Hendricks has men all over. He is obsessed with finding her. She cost him millions with that ledger of hers. Half his operation is shut down because of what she stole. Crawford looked at Pearl with something like respect. Mrs. Emerson, you have done more damage to Hendricks's organization than 2 years of federal investigation, but it also means he will not stop until you are found. Which is why we need to move now. What do you mean? Gabriel asked, still holding Pearl close. I mean I am riding to St. Louis tonight with a team of marshals. We are going to arrest Marcus Hendricks before he can send anyone else after Pearl. These 3 are going to testify against him in exchange for reduced sentences, and combined with the evidence in the ledger, we have enough to put him away for life. Maybe even the noose. Pearl felt lightheaded. It was actually happening. After months of running, of fear, of nightmares, justice was finally within reach. How long? She asked. How long before it is over? Give me 2 weeks, Crawford said. 2 weeks to arrest Hendricks and the rest of his network. Then you can stop looking over your shoulder. True to his word, Crawford and his team rode out that afternoon with their prisoners. Sheriff Dixon stayed with several deputies to guard the ranch, just in case more of Hendricks's men showed up. But the next few days passed quietly. Gabriel refused to let Pearl out of his sight. He brought her with him when he worked, teaching her more about the cattle, letting her help with the horses. They talked about the future, about what they would do when this was finally over. I want to expand the house, Gabriel said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Add another bedroom for when children come, maybe a proper office for you, somewhere you can keep books for the ranch. I would like that, Pearl said, leaning against his shoulder. I would like to keep your books, build something honest and good with you. We will, Gabriel promised. This is just the beginning, Pearl, the beginning of our real life together. Exactly 2 weeks later, a telegram arrived at the sheriff's office. Dixon brought it out to the ranch personally, his face split in a wide grin. It is done, he announced, handing the telegram to Pearl. Hendricks is in custody. 23 arrests in total. Crawford says the case is solid. Hendricks will never see the outside of a prison cell again. Pearl read the telegram 3 times, hardly daring to believe it. Gabriel read it over her shoulder, then let out a whoop and picked her up, spinning her around. It is over, he said, laughing. Pearl, it is really over. That night they celebrated. Frank and Tommy joined them for a special dinner. Pearl had made a roast with all the trimmings, and Gabriel produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. They toasted to justice, to new beginnings, to the future. In bed that night, Gabriel held Pearl close, his hands gentle as they caressed her. No more fear, he murmured. No more looking over your shoulder. You are safe now. We can really live. Make love to me, Pearl whispered. Show me what our future looks like. And Gabriel did, taking his time, worshipping her body with his hands and mouth until she cried out his name. They came together in a tangle of limbs and gasping breaths, and afterward Pearl felt like she could finally, truly breathe. The following months were the happiest of Pearl's life. Summer gave way to fall, and the mountains exploded in color. She and Gabriel worked side by side, building their ranch into a thriving operation. Pearl proved to have a head for business, keeping meticulous books and identifying ways to improve their profit margins. In October, Marshal Crawford came to visit personally, bringing news of the trial. Hendricks had been convicted on multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. He had been sentenced to hang. "It would not have been possible without you," Crawford told Pearl. "Your courage in gathering that evidence and bringing it forward saved countless lives. You should be proud." "I am just glad it is over," Pearl said honestly. "I am glad Sarah's death meant something." "It meant everything," Crawford assured her. "Because of what you did, because of what she helped you do, a major criminal organization has been dismantled. That is a legacy worth celebrating." That winter was harsh, with snow piling high around the ranch house. But inside, Pearl and Gabriel stayed warm, wrapped in blankets by the fire, making plans for the spring. Pearl taught Gabriel to read better, improving his skills beyond the basics he had learned as a child. Gabriel taught Pearl everything he knew about ranching, about reading the land and the animals. In February, Pearl discovered she was pregnant. She told Gabriel one snowy evening, watching his face transform from confusion to joy. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby in late summer, I think," Pearl said, laughing as he pulled her into a careful embrace. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Gabriel said, kissing her thoroughly. "I am elated, terrified but elated." "Me too," Pearl admitted. "I have never been around babies much, but we will figure it out together." Spring arrived with wildflowers blanketing the meadows. Pearl's belly began to round, and Gabriel became almost comically protective, refusing to let her lift anything heavy or work too hard. Frank and Tommy were equally solicitous, treating Pearl like precious china. In May, they received word that Hendricks had been executed for his crimes. Pearl felt a complex mixture of emotions at the news. Relief, certainly, but also sorrow for all the lives he had destroyed, all the pain he had caused. "Is it wrong that I do not feel glad he is dead?" she asked Gabriel that night. "I wanted justice, but now that he is gone, I just feel empty." "It is not wrong," Gabriel said, holding her. "You are not the kind of person who takes joy in death, even the death of someone who hurt you. That is one of the things I love about you." Their son was born on a hot August evening, arriving quickly after a short labor. Gabriel held Pearl's hand through it all, wiping her forehead and whispering encouragement. When the midwife finally placed the squalling baby in Pearl's arms, she felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "He is perfect," she breathed, studying the tiny face. "Gabriel, look at him." "What should we name him?" Gabriel asked, his finger gently stroking the baby's cheek. "Samuel," Pearl said immediately. "After your father." Gabriel's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel Emerson, I like it." Tommy and Frank were delighted with the baby, taking turns holding him and making silly faces to earn his first smile. The ranch became a flurry of activity as they all adjusted to the new addition. Pearl proved to be a natural mother, nursing Samuel and caring for him with a confidence that surprised her. Gabriel was equally devoted, walking the floor with the baby at night when Pearl was too exhausted, singing him nonsense songs that made Pearl laugh. 2 years later, their daughter arrived, a tiny girl with Gabriel's storm gray eyes and Pearl's dark hair. They named her Sarah, in honor of the friend Pearl had lost. "I wish she could have met them," Pearl said one evening, holding baby Sarah while Samuel played at her feet. "I wish she could see that some good came from all that pain." "I think she knows," Gabriel said softly. "I think she is looking down and seeing you happy, seeing you safe, and that is all she would have wanted." Life on the ranch continued its steady rhythm. Samuel grew into a curious, adventurous boy who loved the horses and followed his father everywhere. Sarah was quieter, more thoughtful, but had inherited her mother's sharp mind for numbers. 5 years after their wedding, Pearl and Gabriel sat on their porch one evening, watching their children play in the yard. The house had been expanded just as Gabriel had planned. The ranch was thriving, their cattle bringing good prices at market. You ever think about that first day? Gabriel asked, his arm around Pearl's shoulders. When you stepped off that stagecoach with your carpetbag, looking like you were walking to your execution. Every day, Pearl admitted. I was so scared. I thought I was bringing you nothing but trouble. You brought me everything, Gabriel said firmly. You brought me love, partnership, courage. You made this house a home. Those children playing right there, they exist because you were brave enough to answer an advertisement from a stranger. And you were kind enough to give me a chance, Pearl said, leaning into his warmth. Even after you found out the danger I was bringing to your door, you chose to stand beside me. Best decision I ever made, Gabriel said, kissing the top of her head. Pearl thought about all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. The pain of losing Sarah, the fear of running from Hendricks, the terror of that final confrontation. But also the joy of falling in love with Gabriel, the triumph of seeing justice done, the indescribable sweetness of holding her children. I am happy, she said aloud, almost surprised by the simple truth of it. After everything, I am truly happy. So am I, Gabriel said. So am I. Years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and rewards. Samuel grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Sarah surprised them all by deciding to become a teacher, heading off to Denver for education training when she turned 18. Gabriel and Pearl supported both their children in following their dreams, proud of the people they were becoming. When Pearl turned 45, she and Gabriel celebrated by taking a trip to Cheyenne, their first real vacation in over 20 years. They stayed in a hotel with actual wallpaper and ate dinners they did not have to cook themselves. But by the end of the week, they were both ready to return home, to their ranch, to the life they had built together. Marshall Crawford, now retired, visited occasionally. He always spoke with pride about the Hendricks case, about how Pearl's courage had led to one of the most significant criminal prosecutions in the history of the Western Territories. You changed lives, he told her during one such visit. Not just by bringing down Hendricks, but by showing others that ordinary people can stand up to evil and win. I have had a dozen cases where witnesses found the courage to come forward because they heard about what you did. Pearl was touched by his words but remained humble. I just did what needed to be done. Sarah deserved justice, and she got it, thanks to you. Frank stayed with the ranch until he passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72. Tommy eventually did get his own place, a small spread about 10 miles away, and married a girl from town. They remained close friends with Gabriel and Pearl, their families intertwined. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Gabriel surprised Pearl with a trip back to South Pass City. The town had changed over the years, growing more civilized, less wild. But the bones of the place remained the same. They visited the sheriff's office, now run by Dixon's son. They stopped by the general store, still operated by Mrs. Chen, though she was white-haired now and moved more slowly. And they stood in front of the stage office where Pearl had first stepped off the coach into Gabriel's life. I was so scared that day, Pearl said, holding Gabriel's hand. I could not imagine how any of this would turn out. I was scared too, Gabriel admitted. I had placed an advertisement for a bride because I was lonely, but I had no idea if it would work. Then you appeared, and you were so much more than I had hoped for. Even with all the trouble I brought, especially with all the trouble you brought, Gabriel said with a grin. Life with you has never been boring. They returned to the ranch as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Samuel was there waiting for them, having come home for the anniversary celebration with his wife and 2 young children of his own. Sarah had also made the journey from Denver, bringing her new beau, a schoolteacher she was courting. The house was full of laughter and love that night. 3 generations of Emersons gathered around the table that Gabriel had built with his own hands. Pearl looked around at the faces of her family and felt a contentment so deep, it was almost painful. After everyone had gone to bed, Gabriel and Pearl sat on their porch in the rocking chairs they had bought to replace the old wooden ones that had finally worn out. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. "I could not have asked for a better life," Pearl said softly. "From that terrified girl on the stage coach to this, surrounded by love and family, it is more than I ever dreamed possible." "You made it possible," Gabriel said. "Your courage, your integrity, your strength. You built this life, Pearl. I was just lucky enough to be part of it." "We built it together," Pearl corrected. "Every piece of it." Gabriel reached over and took her hand, his thumb stroking over her wedding ring, worn smooth by 25 years of wear. "I love you. I have loved you from almost the moment I met you, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Pearl said, tears pricking her eyes. "Thank you for giving me a home, a family, a life worth living. Thank you for standing beside me when I needed someone most." "Always," Gabriel promised. "Always and forever." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the familiar sounds of their ranch settling in for the night. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren slept safely, the legacy of a love story that had begun with a desperate woman carrying a ledger full of evidence, and a lonely rancher who had locked his door against danger, but opened his heart to possibility. Pearl thought about Sarah sometimes, especially on clear nights like this. She hoped her friend could see the life Pearl had built, could know that her death had not been in vain. Justice had been served, evil had been defeated, and Pearl had survived to create something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. "What are you thinking about?" Gabriel asked, always attuned to her moods. "Sarah," Pearl admitted, "wishing she could have known all this. Wishing she could have had her own happy ending." "She would be proud of you," Gabriel said gently. "She would be glad you found happiness." "I know," Pearl said. "I just wish she could have found it too." They rocked in silence for a while longer before Gabriel stood, pulling Pearl to her feet. "Come to bed. Tomorrow Samuel wants to show me his plans for expanding his own herd, and Sarah wants your advice on whether she should accept her young man's proposal." "She should," Pearl said with a smile. "He looks at her the way you looked at me that first day in town. Like she is the answer to every prayer he never knew he was praying." "Smart woman," Gabriel said, kissing her temple. "That is exactly how I looked at you, still do, every single day." They went inside, banking the fire and checking that the house was secure. It was an old habit from those dangerous early days, one they had never quite broken. But now it was just routine, not fear. In their bedroom, they undressed slowly, comfortable in the intimacy of 25 years of marriage. Gabriel pulled Pearl close, and they fell asleep wrapped around each other, the way they had almost every night since that first week when she had confessed her secrets, and he had promised to stand beside her. The years continued to pass gently. Sarah married her schoolteacher and moved back to Wyoming, opening a school in South Pass City. Samuel took over more of the ranch operations as Gabriel grew older, though Gabriel remained active and engaged. Grandchildren became great-grandchildren, the ranch house echoing with young voices once again. Pearl never forgot those terrifying months when she had fled across the country with evidence that could get her killed. But the fear faded, replaced by gratitude for the life she had been given, for the man who had stood beside her, for the family they had created together. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration that lasted 3 days. There were children running everywhere, food and laughter and music. Gabriel and Pearl stood in the center of it all, their hands clasped, watching the fruits of their love spread out before them. 50 years, Gabriel marveled. It went so fast. And yet I remember every moment, Pearl said. Every joy, every challenge, every quiet evening on our porch. I would not change a single thing. Not even the danger, not even the fear, not even that, Pearl said firmly. Because it brought me here to you, to this life. It was worth every terrifying moment. Their oldest great-granddaughter, a precocious 7-year-old named Pearl in honor of her great-grandmother, tugged on Pearl's skirt. "Tell us the story, great-grandma. Tell us how you and great-grandpa met." Pearl looked at Gabriel, who smiled and nodded. They settled into their rocking chairs, surrounded by their descendants, and Pearl began to speak. "It was 1871, she said, and I was running from very bad men who wanted to hurt me. I had in my possession a ledger, a book full of evidence of their crimes. I was scared and alone, and I did not know where to turn." The children listened with wide eyes as Pearl told them the story, how she had answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride, how Gabriel had met her at the stagecoach, how she had confessed her secrets, and he had chosen to help her. She told them about the men who came in the night, about Marshall Crawford's trap, about the final confrontation that had ended the threat. "And then what happened?" little Pearl asked breathlessly. "Then we lived," Pearl said simply, looking at Gabriel with all the love of 50 years shining in her eyes. "We built this ranch, raised our family, and lived the life we had fought so hard to have. We were happy." "The end?" one of the boys asked. "Not the end," Gabriel said, pulling his wife close. "Never the end, just the beginning of everything good and worthwhile in my life." Pearl kissed him softly, aware of all the eyes watching them. "In my life, too. I came here desperate and afraid, and you gave me safety, love, and a home. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Gabriel corrected. As the sun set on their golden anniversary, painting the Wyoming mountains in shades of fire, Pearl and Gabriel sat surrounded by the evidence of their love. 50 years since that day, when she had stepped off the stagecoach with a ledger full of secrets and fear in her heart. 50 years since Gabriel had locked the door against danger and opened his heart to a stranger. It had been worth it. Every moment of fear, every danger faced, every challenge overcome. Because at the end of the road had been this love, family, belonging. A life built on courage and trust, strengthened by years of standing together through whatever came their way. Pearl leaned her head on Gabriel's shoulder and watched their great-grandchildren play in the yard where she had once taught their grandparents to walk. The ranch that Gabriel had built with his own hands would continue for generations, a testament to what two people could create when they chose to face the world together. The ledger that had brought them together was long gone now, filed away in some government office as evidence in a closed case. But its legacy lived on in this family, in this love, in the knowledge that doing the right thing, no matter how frightening, could lead to beautiful things. "I love you," Pearl whispered to her husband of 50 years. "I love you too," Gabriel whispered back. "Today, tomorrow, and always." And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the same stars that had watched over them for half a century, Pearl knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Home, with the man she loved, surrounded by the family they had built together. It was, she thought with deep contentment, the very best kind of happy ending, the kind that was really just a beginning that never stopped unfolding into joy.